It was daytime, and right in front of Golden Ring Island, something happened. The waves began to form a strange pattern in the ocean. Not long after, the water started to concentrate at a single point, creating a marine whirlpool. This strange event caused the fish and crabs that inhabited the area to come ashore, and many of them lost their lives. Just then, someone whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy elegantly emerged from the marine whirlpool. Upon feeling this, the attention of Marshal St. Harold and his men turned toward the body, causing their jaws and eyes to widen in surprise and confusion. They were all in shock, not knowing what was happening. It was our boy, Luang. Using his power, he began to create small golden steps and slowly started walking toward the island. They were in shock upon seeing that he had emerged from the sea whirlpool. Harold and his men quickly knelt before Luang, joined their hands, closed their eyes, and with a respectful demeanor welcomed the martial saint. Harold's eyes were full of fear while sweating profusely. He realized that Luang had become stronger. He remembered that Luang had said he was a level 8 warrior, but it was obvious that he did not have the power of a level 8. If he was a level 8 warrior, then Harold was determined to cut off his own head and join the martial saints of the Dark Star. Using the golden steps, Luang reached Golden Ring Island and began to observe Harold in silence. The attention of Marshal St. Harold was fixed on him. He thought about the guides and was sure that our boy was at the same level as the guides. And even if he wasn't far from being so. Luang softly landed on the ground and with a calm expression asked if Harold and the others were ready. Harold lowered his head before him as a sign of respect. Luang's attention was fixed on them, and his eyes widened in surprise because this was very strange to him. He remembered that Harold's experts had died, and many had been seriously injured during the attack by Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. He was confused because he did not know how so many experts had appeared again in such a short time. Thinking calmly, it didn't take him long to realize that Harold had merged the experts from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. Harold stood up, extended his hand, and with a pleasant expression, mentioned that they were ready to leave at any moment. Luang looked away and, with a serene gaze, said that there was no more time to lose. They boarded a private plane. Harold, who was sitting in the seat next to Luang, began to observe our boy in silence. Luang took out an energy crystal, and his attention was fixed on it. He could not help but sink into his thoughts since energy crystals held many secrets. Luang's eyes widened in surprise. He brought the energy crystal closer and explained that the energy crystals Harold had given him had been completely absorbed by his body, and now his immortal cells had risen to more than 278. For him, their effect was truly incredible, and it was no wonder that even the strongest of advanced civilizations harvested them as stellar. Level resources. Our boy's body began to emit a powerful martial energy. Feeling this, Harold's eyes widened in fear and surprise, making him sweat, his gaze fixed on Luang's body, realizing that sitting next to him was like being under the sun while sitting beside a barbecue furnace. Luang's energy started expanding throughout the plane. He closed his eyes and concentrated, realizing that it wasn't just heat but a burning sensation. Every time Luang breathed, it was as if his body expelled lava. While he was distracted, Luang clenched his fist, turned towards him, and with a confident gaze caught his attention. He asked if Harold believed that with a single punch, he would be able to defeat a martial saint. Upon hearing this, Harold snapped out of his thoughts, and his eyes widened in fear. He couldn't help but swallow hard and feel chills all over his body. He quickly clasped his hands together and bowed his head before Luang with a respectful demeanor. He revealed that he had a portion of the energy crystals he had collected from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, promising to hand them over immediately. With his eyes full of tears, Harold took out a bag full of energy crystals and handed it to Luang. Our boy's attention was fixed on the bag, and his eyes began to shine with confusion. He didn't know what was happening. If he said that this was not really his intention, Harold would not believe him. Luang took the bag of energy crystals, and his attention focused on it, making his eyes fill with joy, and a smile spread across his face. Adding to what he had before, Luang now had more than a kilogram of energy crystals. Admitting that Harold had many resources and money, Luang tossed the bag into the air and couldn't help but smile. Harold rested his head on his hand and sighed. This moment reminded him of an old saying from the Dragon Kingdom. Accompanying a king was like accompanying a wild tiger. Back then, he didn't understand it very well, but now he fully comprehended it. Luang turned towards him and began to show a grateful smile, but Harold started to see death itself in our boy's aura. For him, being next to someone who, at any moment, could decide his life or death was truly like being accompanied by death itself. Something terrifying. Luang rested his hands on the arms of the seat, and his eyes began to shine with hatred, making the energy emerging from his body grow more intense. His power had increased too quickly, and he still had not mastered many aspects of controlling it properly. To get used to this power, many battles and high-intensity combats were necessary. He began to imagine himself kissing Snowy, something he couldn't do now, as he would end up burning her mouth. He also imagined himself with his arms crossed, next to his charred parents. If he spent too much time with his family, they would end up charred. Luang's gaze expanded with determination. He placed his hand on his chest. He needed pressure. The last time the guides had taken account, there were 24 level 9 martial saints on the blue planet. Now, with 3 dead and some injured, adding Harold, only 20 remained. He began to imagine all the powerful martial saints of the planet staring at him intently. He didn't know if the 20 martial saints would be able to put pressure on him. If 2 couldn't pressure him, he planned to face 20 or even 30. Luang turned his head towards the airplane window, and with a serious gaze he began to observe the landscape. If fighting against all the martial saints was not enough, then there would be no other option but to fight against the so-called guides. The airplane was flying at high speed, and it was already midday. Half an hour later, they arrived at an island, and on top of the mountains, there was a castle. Once the airplane landed, Luang stepped out, and his attention was fixed on the castle. Harold, who was standing behind him, Harold extended his hands and explained that this place was called the Island of the 1,000 Sages, which had been named by the World Martial Arts Association. Luang's eyes widened with joy, and a confident smile appeared on his face. Seeing that the island was called the Island of the 1,000 Sages, he could not deny that the martial saints of the blue planet had rather grand aspirations. He then asked Harold what was next. Harold closed his eyes, put his hand inside his suit, and explained that before the start of the tournament, there would be a party mainly for martial arts masters to exchange ideas and resources. Additionally, they could take advantage of the occasion to submit to the World Martial Arts Association a list of items they wished to trade. Luang became curious and began listening to Harold in silence. The martial saint Harold took out a list and asked our boy to take a look at it. Luang took the list, and his eyes widened in surprise. On the list, there was information about life nutrient liquid number 3, which had a certain nourishing effect on the martial soul and could strengthen the manifestation of the Dharma. The price was 2 kg of energy crystals per unit. There was also tempered life liquid number 3, which had a certain refining effect on the martial body and could strengthen it. It had the same price as the nutrient liquid, 2 kg of energy crystals per unit. While holding the list with one hand, Luang turned to Harold and, with a curious expression, mentioned that all available items for exchange were designed for martial saints, and the lowest price was at least 1 kg of energy crystals. He realized that things hadn't gone well for Harold, a level 9 martial saint, since he hadn't been able to save even 1 kilogram in over 100 years. Upon hearing this, Harold's eyes began to shine with embarrassment. He panicked and, with a forced smile, explained that the reason was that he had already exchanged some things before, so now he didn't have much wealth on hand. However, several martial saints with whom he had a good relationship still owed him quite a few energy crystals. He promised that once he collected them, he would hand them over to Luang. A smile spread across our boy's face, as he couldn't believe that the old fox herald had an ace up his sleeve. Something caught our boy's attention, making him curious. His gaze fixed on the list where there was also an item called the Level 10 Will Protection Talisman. It contained the will of a Level 10 expert and could be activated at will, but its exchange price was 30 kg of energy crystals per unit. Luang remembered when that bastard Xiao Jie spat out a talisman while on the brink of death. He grabbed the list again, and his eyes widened in surprise, realizing that Xiao Jia had paid 30 ki for the talisman. He began to imagine Marshal Saint Xiao Jia smiling and making various rare items float. After being the human god of the Dragon Kingdom for more than 100 years, his wealth was not something that a mere organization leader like Harald could match. It was very likely that he had also kept the inheritance of many martial saints who had fallen in battle during the war between the Dragon and Lion kingdoms. Luang's eyes widened with hatred. He knew that these things were surely only meant to deceive martial saints from remote villages. He started imagining the guides with items hanging from their fingers. He better than anyone else knew that guides took leftovers from their civilizations, things they no longer used, to give them to martial saints, and in this way, they managed to make them sell their souls for the items. First, the guides impoverished them by 90s, then they exchanged trash with them, and finally, they took tens of the energy crystals, making it a perfect business. Luang began walking toward the castle and threw the list into the air, knowing that only by leaving the blue star and setting foot in the vast universe could one understand how immense and magnificent it truly was. Only then would they be able to stand on equal footing with true martial artists. A few hours later, the party began, and somewhere in the castle was the dressing room. Inside was Luang, who was getting dressed in front of a mirror. He started adjusting his tie and couldn't help but smile, not knowing if the guests would be able to recognize him if he stood before everyone. Harold, who was behind him, extended his hands and, with a smile, mentioned that Luang's disguise was perfect. Although his appearance had changed, he still dazzled like a deity, radiant and perfect. With a serious expression, Luang explained that even if Harold made his adulation sound like flattery, he would still have to hand over every last gram of energy crystals he owed. Harold placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and with a smile promised to do so and decided to go ahead. The guests began to enjoy the party, some drinking alcohol and others conversing among themselves. Luang came out of the dressing room and started walking through the hall, his attention fixed on the others. Everyone here had at least a grandmaster level, not only standing out in power, but also in appearance. Realizing that this was truly a gathering of the planet's elite, nothing like the boring birthday celebration of the Chen family. Among those at the party were Dong Shini and Lin Wanwen talking to each other. As Luang passed nearby, his gaze fixed on them. Seeing his brother-in-law's spirit, he noticed that he had resumed his martial path. Dong Shini had shaved his hair, and with a kind smile, he began to converse with Lin Wanwen. Seeing this, Luang couldn't help but smile. He didn't know if this was a symbol of starting from scratch. Luang started walking through the hall and began looking at all the guests. He wanted to see if there were any other old acquaintances. Just then, something caught Luang's attention, making him stop and turn to the side. At the party were also the marshals of the army, who were chatting among themselves. With a smile, Luang began observing them and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused upon seeing that even the army of the Dragon Kingdom was here. Although they did not have their own martial saint, they had still come to fight for Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhongyu's interests, and had even brought their most precious treasure, the old yet unbreakable sword. He was curious, but didn't know whether he should approach them to greet them. Just then, a portal opened in front of everyone. Seeing this, they couldn't help but feel joyful and excited. Everyone clenched their fists because Miss Fiona, the flower of the alliance, had arrived. Luang's gaze fixed on the portal, and his eyes widened in surprise as a beautiful woman with long hair emerged from the portal and began walking through the hall, causing all the men to start cheering for her. Luang was mesmerized as he watched Fiona. To him, a fairy tale princess would not be more dazzling than her, and her genetics were exceptionally perfect, far above ordinary.